Hello, everyone, and welcome to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Liz Owen. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Director of Communications at PFLAG National. Great to have you with us. Very excited to have this conversation, and happy, healthy New Year to all of you. It's our first live show of 2022. Let me bring on my friend and colleague, our host for this show, our Director of Learning and Inclusion, Jean Marie Nevada.
Liz Owen, Happy New Year.
And to you, my friend. How are you?
I am doing well. I enjoyed my time off. I am sad that we did not get to see each other again because of COVID.
I know we were this close to an in-person visit, and then all
2
bets were
hours
off.
apart and like 200,000 years apart, it feels like.
That is definitely what it feels like.
Well, here we go again for another year. Hopefully within the next few months, we will finally break our streak of not seeing each other beyond the screen.
Here is hoping. Have a great show.
Thanks, Liz. We'll see you later. Hey, everybody. Happy New Year. My name is Jean Marie Nevada, and I'm the Director of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG National, and my pronouns are she and ella. Every single week, we get together to talk about something related to LGBTQ inclusion and equality, and this week, we are talking about economics, the economics of queerness, and how identity plays out when it comes to looking at what people's experiences are, when it comes to what it looks like for their finances and what their economic outlook is like, especially when they are people with disabilities too. So we are going to be using 2 articles for today's discussion. They are on our normal site where we have them, which is straightforequality.org/discussion series. The first one is from the 19th, and the title of it is The Census Bureau's First Ever Data on LGBTQ People Indicates Deep Disparities. The second article that we're going to be using, because I think these 2 conversations need to happen at the same time, actually comes from CAP, and it is The United States Must Advance Economic Security for Disabled LGBTQI+ workers. And let me just give you a couple of the top line pieces that I think came out of these 2 articles. So in looking at some of that Census Pulse data, it revealed that 2 in 3 from July 21st to September 13th, LGBTQ people reported being more than likely than non-LGBTQ people to have lost employment, not had enough to eat, be at an elevated risk for eviction or foreclosure, and face difficulty just paying for basic household expenses. And then when we started to look at other research, which is this amazing research the Center for American Progress has on LGBTQI people with disabilities, a few of the top line findings there. First of all, 2 in 3 LGBTQI+ adults who have a disability say that they have experienced discrimination and that it has affected their ability to be hired. Disabled trans individuals were 5 times more likely than non-disabled cisgender individuals to report being unemployed and that they were looking for work for more than a month. And 2 in 5 disabled LGBTQI+ adults have postponed or avoided medical cares because of the costs associated with them. So this kind of flies in the face of a lot of things that we often hear about the LGBTQ community. And I think we need to pull all of it apart. But to pull it apart, we need really, really smart people. And as usual, we have them. So I would like to welcome our 2 guests today. First, we have Kathy Renna, the Director of Communications from the LGBTQ Task Force. Hello, Kathy.
Hello. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. It's always good to see you, my friend. And we also have Mia Ives-Rublee, who's the Director of Disability Justice Initiative at the Center for American Progress. Hey, Mia, how are you?
Hi, thank you for having me on. I'm so glad to be here. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm really happy to be here. And as I was saying, as we were getting ready to do the show today, I'm so excited to talk about this research because there's power with numbers. And so let's start by talking about the Census Bureau's Household Pulse Survey. So Kathy, in that survey, it really did reveal some very big disparities during that time period. From the LGBTQ respondents. Did any of the results of that survey actually surprise you when you saw them?
You know, I love using the expression shocking but not surprising. The task force, I was actually working with them on the Queer the Census campaign prior to becoming the communications director. So I have a lot of experience, working with Megan Mowry and the rest of the staff at the task force on this. No, not really surprising at all. I mean, very, very disheartening and sad. And I think the important takeaway is that we actually now have some data, because
Yes.
with the data, we can make a difference. You know, as we often said, you know, if you're not counted, you're not going to count, right? So funding and policy change and all of the important progress that we need to make won't happen unless we actually have facts and data to back up what we, you know, anecdotally, for those of us who are in the trenches and work with the community day to day, know is absolutely true. So in that way, I think it's, you know, it's really, really important that we're starting to ask these questions. We're starting to get this information from a much more diverse set of folks in our community.
Yeah, and I definitely want to talk about who was answering the questions and the way that data was included too. But Mia, I want to ask you, so we can bring these two conversations together. I had a couple of the findings from your study, but can you give us some of the most important top line findings from the research in your mind that people should be paying attention to?
Sure, yeah, definitely. Well, one thing that I want to make note of, particularly with the household pulse survey, was that unfortunately they didn't take into account disability until March of last year. And so unfortunately our data set for disability is much smaller, so we don't really have what's happening at the beginning of the pandemic versus what's happening sort of now during the pandemic. But we did get some data from that that subset, and I would say, you know, the findings that we found in our report were not surprising at all. But what we found was that the percentage of LGBT individuals who have a disability, it is 39%, which is a high percentage versus the general population, which is 25%, or 1 in 4 people.
Wow.
And so a lot of people didn't understand that correlation, but it was something that was quite obvious in the disability community. And we say that it's unsurprising because of the fact that these individuals have to deal with a significant amount of discrimination within the communities, and tensions, and sometimes even violence within their families that can result in numerous, you know, mental health complications, and it can even affect physical health degradations, right? So all of these things are very connected. We also know autistic individuals are also actually much more highly likely to be sexually divergent from the normal population, and so they identify differently. And so what we found was that, you know, when looking at health discrimination, or looking at how discrimination was affecting disabled LGBTQ people, it showed that a high percentage of these individuals dealt with or faced difficulties obtaining and maintaining work. And we know that employment affects almost every portion of somebody's life. And we saw that 61% of individuals who described facing any type of discrimination had it negatively affect their ability to retain employment, compared to 40% of LGBTQ individuals without disabilities. So there's even a difference between individuals with disabilities in the community and individuals without that. And so what happens when you have this high relation of inequalities in obtaining and maintaining employment? It affects all of these other portions within their life. And so we saw issues around housing, food insecurity, and healthcare access.
Yeah. I have to tell you, that was one of the things that I found most interesting about the study, that it was looking at LGBTQ individuals with disabilities and without, that it wasn't comparing LGBTQ people just to people who were not members of the community. And I found that really, really fascinating stuff. And as I went into those numbers, I found myself becoming even more rattled as the further in you went, the more you saw. It was kind of these things you had a sense of, but to actually have the numbers on it.
Yeah.
You know, the data is power. Kathy, you know, the previous census data only accounted for same-sex couples. So it was very, very gay, lesbian focused, frankly. How did we get to creating data in a more comprehensive way? And why is doing this so important for people who may not be familiar with data collection?
Well, I mean, it was certainly a struggle. I mean, the last census in particular, we were working with a very difficult administration, to say the least. And also, you know, COVID prompted a real challenge in terms of having to pivot just the way we were actually doing the work. And Megan Mowry, who I mentioned before, who was our policy director, is actually now working at the Census Bureau, which to me is the most hopeful thing I can think of, because now as a senior advisor at the Census Bureau, they can advocate from within to really, create more diverse questioning. Because you're right, there was only the one question, but we still did the campaign to try and get as many people as possible to respond, to the 2020 census. It's it's a challenge, and I think what Mia was saying before is absolutely right. I mean, we need to look first to our own community, right? Because if we start asking questions about why there are these different perceptions and ideas around whether it's economic status or ability within our own community, we need to look at our own issues, our own isms around those two things for starters. And that's a really important piece of the puzzle here. So it's advocating within our own community first to get folks on board, to help them understand why it's incredibly important to get data across and at the intersections of the different identities that we hold.
Thank you. Thank you. And I found it fascinating to actually have that breakout data, because I've always found the census stuff to be very frustrating because we could only speak in really broad generalities, and knowing what we know from other research, it to me left all these gaps. So I think these pulse surveys that are more inclusive are just, they're exciting in a way, because I think it gives us so much more to work with. Mia, I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about sort of that comparison between LGBTQI people with disabilities and without. So what do you think accounted for some of the disparities that we saw in people's experiences? Obviously, having a disability causes a series of challenges. But do you think that what people were sometimes seeing was the layers of different kinds of bias, or is there some sort of systemic issue that might explain these significant differences in the experiences that people were having?
Yeah, I think it's both. Unfortunately, I think that there are systematic structural barriers that disabled LGBTQ individuals face when we're looking at employment, and even things like access to healthcare. Right? We talk about something that's very, very prominent in our community, which includes talking about trans rights and access to gender affirming care. Right? And we talk about there's an issue where there is ableism within the evaluations on whether you are allowed to have that procedure, right? And whether insurance can cover it. Because one of the questions is, what's your mental health status, and also what is your IQ status, right? Do you know that? Do you know the differences in gender, and do you know what your gender is? So all of this causes barriers for individuals who have disabilities and are seen as individuals who don't have a right to their own gender affirming situations, right? And so, looking at just sort of like barrier upon barrier that are causing individuals to not be able to access the community, access the healthcare that they need, and access the services and supports that they need. So of course, that's going to cause its own, significant stratification of disabled people who also identify as LGBTQ.
Absolutely. And Kathy, did you want to add anything onto that one?
Yeah, I mean, this is making me think of, as we were saying before, having to look to our own community. We just had to, unfortunately, we're all heartbroken, announce that Creating Change, the annual conference that the task force does, which brings together thousands of, just a super diverse group of queer folks, is going to be virtual again. When it was in person, one of the things I remember about working on Creating Change was that there was always a tremendous amount of thought, and every year something to be learned about making the conference what we would call radically accessible, right? And there was always something that we had to learn or missed or got schooled on, but that's really important. Those conversations are hard, but they need to happen. And one of the interesting things about these virtual events, because it will be virtual later on this year, is that that has made these events more accessible in many ways for folks. And that has created the opportunity to have some of these really important conversations that Mia's talking about.
And you're right. And it's amazing how COVID has been terrible, but in some ways it has opened up doors for some people who did not ever have access to some of these spaces. Mia, there's something that just kind of popped into my head as you were talking, and I just wanted to see if you had any perspective on this, which is my sense of our community is we place an enormous premium on youth, on healthy bodies. Do you think that part of the challenges that we are facing on this issue is a fundamental discomfort with disability that is in some ways even deeper in the queer spaces because of that real emphasis? And I hope I'm not speaking out of school there, but it's my own perception.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think about, when we look at all of the campaigns around support for the LGBTQ community, and what is the first right that we as a community gained, and it was marriage equality. But it wasn't marriage equality for everybody. It was marriage equality for individuals who weren't disabled, because disabled people still don't have marriage equality because of restrictions on services, right? And I think about the fact that much of our work and our movement was started by queer and trans people of color, and yet they're the voices that are often silenced the first, right? And thinking about how all of these structural barriers, whether it is ableism or if it's colorism or something like that, even transphobia that's within our own community, all of those things are impacting this community, and it unfortunately siloing communities is not helpful to the work that we are doing. But unfortunately, it's easier for certain people who already have access to, equity and financial stability, individuals who have access to being white, right? They only see them getting to the standards that other white people have, rather than thinking, how can we make sure that our whole community is brought along in this process towards equity, right? So I think that's what's really happening, is the individuals who get the microphone are individuals who already have some sort of privilege within society and have been able to sort of usurp the conversation around what equity means for the LGBTQ community.
And if it's not on your radar, it's not on your radar. And if it's not your priority yet, although I had a friend who used to always remind us we are always one fall away from experiencing disability. And it was his constant reminder to me that at any moment that could change for any of us. And that experience, when it does change, is remarkably eye-opening.
Yeah, but I almost hope that, I hear that comment all the time. And my curiosity is always one, I worry that it's a scare tactic rather than actually asking or requiring people to see us as individuals who deserve rights, rather than, oh, you might become disabled, so you need to provide all of us access, rather than you're a human being. You
do the right
access, right?
Yeah, do the right thing. That's why you should be doing it, not because.
And, Jean Marie knows I've been doing this for, let's just say, a very, very, very long time, like more than 2 decades, less than 4. It's about intentionality. It's about, making sure that people understand that our community, and then this is since I work with media and have for my entire career, like, it's about showing folks that we are like a microcosm of the larger culture, which of course the downside is that we do tend to, lean towards youth and celebrity and all of that, and ableism and the patriarchy. But, when I worked with New York City Pride last year, one of the grand marshals was Aaron Rose Phillip. And it was just so important and meant so much. And there was so much amazing feedback to have, an out trans disabled person who's a model, and really just you want to say a pioneer, but I almost don't even want to say that, because it's like, this is just a person who is, yes, breaking barriers, but living their life and being themselves, across various communities and really just demonstrating the true diversity of who we are. And, trust me, this was probably very eye-opening to a lot of the, cisgender gay white men out there, who were, as Mia rightly put, out there in the front in the early days and were the most visible. But turn on your TV now, open well, we don't really read newspapers anymore, but, turn on your computer and go look at things online. Things are so much more diverse. I always think about my daughter, who's 16 now, it identifies as part of the community, is dating someone who's non-binary, has a ton of queer friends. I met them last week when I went to visit for the holidays. And it's a new generation and they get it. So, those of us who are older really need to catch up, because we talk about these issues in a way that, it's why we've been doing the work all these years, but in a way that really gives me some hope for the future.
It is part of their normal conversation, whereas a lot of us had to learn it and play catch up, and still haven't in many respects. Kathy, I wanted to ask you a question about something that was in the article about the Census Pulse survey, which said that the data was good, but it was pretty small sample sizes, and that there were fairly low response rates from certain demographics. So what do you think was behind this? And even more importantly, because we love talking about solutions, how do you think we can be more proactive in getting people to participate in research like this? I mean, you mentioned the Queer the Census campaign, which was so important, but what was going on there?
Well, I think that, the barriers, as Mia was saying, when the barriers are multiple ones, it becomes more and more challenging to reach folks, whether because they live in a rural area, whether there are economic obstacles. Reaching out to communities of color is more challenging. The LGBT media is not, does not have as diverse an audience as we'd like, so we really had to drill down. And then I think that's, that creates some tremendous challenges, and we have to continue. I'm working with and partnering with the task force, with the folks who are doing the LGBTQ women's health survey. Mm-hmm. And, they're getting incredible results. They've had almost 10,000 folks finish the survey, and about 30% of them identify as either a person of color or multiracial. And that's because there was just such an incredible amount of grassroots intentional outreach done from the top down, from the advisory board and the researchers themselves to the folks who are actually doing, the outreach. And that's how you make that happen. Again, it's all about, intentionality and rolling up your sleeves and doing the really hard work.
Yeah. So Mia, the CAP report has a number of very high level policy recommendations. But in addition to the high level policy stuff, which is for the people working in that space, what are some of the everyday things that you think everyday advocates, queer and our allies, can and should be doing to start these conversations about disability, to start asking the right questions? What would you suggest to people?
I think there's two things that folks can do. I think one thing is just to get more involved in their communities. I think that's a simpler task to do, right? There's ways that you can, write to your senators. There's ways to get involved in some type of service work within your community. You're going to run into queer, disabled people just in that way in general. I think also, if you want to be more proactive, to take some of the trainings, whether it's a safe space training, whether it is a bystander training, take those trainings, get educated on the issues. If you don't know what a specific term means, because the LGBTQ community is known for its wide variety of terms, to the point where sometimes I can't keep up. And, just Google it. That's what we have, right? We can educate ourselves on more about the community, and that's really important as well. I would say lastly is you have an ability to enact change legislatively as well, and whether that means passing local ordinances in your cities and in your counties supporting LGBTQ rights, supporting access rights in terms of disability. And then you can also support the Equity Act, right? So we can support a way to provide a basic fundamental right to exist as an LGBTQ individual, which will affect all of the community in general. So, I mean, I think there are a lot of different ways, whether you want to get super involved or if you are only able to do it tangentially.
Yeah, and I would also say if you haven't done it yet, if you just read the article that we posted today, definitely link to the actual CAP research and go through that report. It is such an eye opener, and I found that with every single data point that I read, I probably had another 10 questions and the what if we did this and what if this happened this way, and I thought it was so exciting. So I really encourage people. It is not difficult to get through. It's not heavy duty. Really thick research. It's very accessible. So please do that. And Kathy, as we start wrapping up, different opportunities to participate in research and studies come up a lot. What would you say to queer people who have maybe not done any of that before, and how would you advocate for more people to participate in this kind of research?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I think that it's stay aware. I mean, exactly everything that Mia said. I mean, the other thing that I would add to this is get outside your own bubble. I mean, because that's really what has always, on a personal level and professional level, really helped open my eyes and educate me and help me learn more about just how diverse our community is. Who's out there, what the issues are, and what folks care about. It's not something that we do unless we do it with intention. And so, the other thing I wanted to say is actually happened today. We have a new Census Bureau director, Robert Santos, and this is someone who we have all supported, the task force, the Victory Fund, others, Task Force Action Fund, C4. Got to be specific about that. So hopefully this will change, and there will be more funding towards targeting LGBTQ people to participate in the census. We were kind of challenged with COVID. Obviously, we had all these plans to do, in-person events and go to LGBT centers and go to Pride and get people engaged. We couldn't do that. We had to do it all virtually, and that was tough. But, to get folks to participate, you have to go to them often.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be the key.
Yes. Well, thank you both. Thank you for coming and doing the research, for explaining the research, for getting out there and doing the advocacy associated with it, and for sharing your knowledge. I appreciate you both, Mia and Kathy. Thank you so much for your time today and for everything that you contribute to this movement. Your work is critically important.
Right back at you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Well, before we wrap up today, I would be remiss if I did not mention something about the fact that it is the 1-year commemoration of the January 6th insurrection. And I was thinking about it a lot as we were putting together today's show. And on my washing machine, I keep a lot of quotes from smart people that I write and stick up there, and I look at them while I'm doing my laundry. And I had this one, which was from Representative Reverend Raphael Warnock. And he said, and this was in March of last year, I wrote it down, I was listening to an interview with him, "A vote is a kind of prayer about the world." And it really sticks with me. And as I think about what we are looking at 1 year down the road, it's important for us to all remember that our votes are sacred, no matter what color, background, political affiliation, identity that we have. People who commit treason against our country and endanger our lives have absolutely no business running a government in our name. So rather than focus on just what divides us, let's commit to something really positive today. Regardless of our differences, let's all be really clear. In America, voters get to decide who is going to run the government. So if you are paying attention to what happened a year ago today, I think the best way for us to really honor our democracy, try to put things back together again, is to get on the phone with our legislators and send those emails to our legislators. Please tell them to support the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, Amendment Act, which will create national standards that protect our rights, ensure that trusted local election officials count every vote, and it prevents partisan politicians from sabotaging the results of our elections. If you would like to learn more about these two pieces of legislation and how you can become active in advocacy, I really, really encourage you to go to pflag.org/issues/Voting Rights Act to learn more. That is the best thing that we can do. So we will be back again next week with another great show and some really smart people who will probably cause me to write more quotes that I'll have on my washing machine. But until then, we wrap up the same way every single time, reminding you to run fast, laugh hard, and most of all, please be kind. And if you haven't done it yet, get vaccinated. And if you haven't gotten your booster, get that booster and keep wearing your masks, everybody. We want to be together again really, really soon. Until next week, if you need any help, please visit us at pflag.org. My name is Jean Marie Navetta, and I will see you next week.